Hello, welcome to the Cabin Boy Knits Woolcast, coming to you deep from the Canadian forest.
This is Christopher.
And this is the other guy,
Jamie.
This episode is all about Costa Rica and our visit to the Borucans.
And the Borucans did some very specific natural dyeing using a historical Tyrion purple.
We also have some news hot off the press from CBK. So sit back, grab your favorite drink, and we'll tell you our story. We just came back from an amazing trip to Costa Rica. It was fantastic. The weather was fantastic. The food was amazing. The people were beyond amazing.
They were beyond friendly. You can't even describe the beauty of the place. We'll get into more details, but it was astonishingly beautiful. Beautiful people all around. A wonderful, wonderful experience.
Now, did you know where Costa Rica was before we planned our trip?
Over there.
Well, look over there. So just for people who aren't familiar with Costa Rica is located between Nicaragua and Panama. And I did a little bit of research before we left, just to get a sense of Costa Rica, the rich coast in Spanish. Yes. And it was about just under 5 hours flight time from Toronto.
Not very far at all.
And I read that they are one of the happiest people in the world, the Costa Ricans.
This is true.
12th happiest in the world, and the literacy rate is 97%.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
And they've been around since 10,000 to 7,000 BCE.
There's a history, a cultural history there, that is for sure.
And we enjoyed the beaches. We enjoyed talking to the jungle, and talking to the Costa Ricans, the Borucans. It was amazing. We had such a great time.
And what's interesting is even with the language barrier, it was interesting the way you could still communicate, and just their way of being and their happiness. They were like, they'd listen, they understood, even without being able to speak the language.
Yeah, absolutely. And so why do we pick Costa Rica?
Particularly for one reason, many reasons, but also because we could tie it in with what we love to do. Natural dyeing.
Yes. And so I was thinking, we had a really tough, I wouldn't say tough, but exhausting 2022. And so I said to Jamie, we need to get away for a week and relax. I just want to take my flip-flops and that's it.
And do nothing.
And read and knit. And that's all I want to do.
That didn't happen. We did stuff.
And I just thought, oh my gosh, do I even know myself? Like one thing I did do though was I didn't plan anything. We booked the hotels.
Yes.
So I booked a hotel and I thought, and I did a global search and thought, I want find a place that's relaxing and I can just wear flip-flops for a week and that's it.
Exactly.
And so we found a place and I thought, perfect. And then when I started looking into Costa Rica, I thought, there's a lot to see in Costa Rica.
A lot of different areas.
So maybe we don't want to stay in one spot for the whole visit. So we booked 2 other hotels and
just switch it up a little.
And it was amazing.
Which is what everybody said. And, and then we watched a lot of videos and some of these tourist guides who the first thing they did say is you want to change locations because there's so much to see, different landscape, different waterfalls, different jungles, different beaches. different histories in different areas. So we switched it up a bit.
Yeah, and I will be honest with you, I was a little...
Are you being honest with me?
Tell
me more. What did I miss?
Well, as I started reading about Costa Rica, I started reading about the deadly snakes. And,
he doesn't
and
tell
spiders.
me everything.
I didn't tell him everything.
No, and as we know, it's just like watching a movie. If there's something up ahead that we want to see, I don't watch previews. So
Yes.
I don't like previews of these planned holidays. I don't want to see a picture. I don't want to. I know where we're going, but I don't want to see visuals because I want it to be like, what, when I see it firsthand.
But there's so many animals there, and so it's great. So that I discounted that and didn't think about the poisonous snakes, and we didn't happen upon any anyway. But to get back to the objective of the vacation, the objective of the vacation was to relax for a week or 10 days. And
I'm exhausted. We've only been back. We haven't been back a week, have we?
No. And so I packed 3 books and 2 knitting projects.
I packed 2 books, and I didn't bring knitting.
And so...
Because I thought, I know I'm not going to knit.
How many books did I finish reading? 0.
I picked up some magazines at the airport, just some entertaining fluff magazines, Hollywood-ish junk that's fun and easy to read.
And I had socks. I was going to knit a pair of socks and a hat. Just simple. The hat, didn't really have to think about it on the plane. So
his point is there are no finished objects
there's
today.
one finished object. Well, yeah.
Well, yeah, you did finish one. Okay, I was wrong.
But technically not on the trip, so you are right.
Yes.
So the first place we went to was up in the mountains, and it was 4 hours south of San Jose. San Jose is the capital.
Yeah, and this gets interesting because we thought, okay, so we're in a foreign country. We need a 4x4 to get to our location because it's way up in the mountains, and they said you need a 4x4.
And it wasn't.
There's a dirt road.
That was very clear. They were very clear. It was the XT10 hotel. It was very clear on the fact that we needed a 4x4
because you won't get up the hill.
And it was true.
Hill, and more hill. And also, they said when you get partway there is no GSP to be had, so you need to follow
GPS.
What did I just say?
GSP.
The thing in the air that...
Well,
how technical I am. That thing in the air that goes round and round and tells you where to go on a little machine in your car. That doesn't work. He specifically said print out these because at one point you will need to just follow my written directions.
But do you know why that is as well? Do you know why GPS doesn't work?
About it.
Yes, you do.
No, I don't.
Because
I call it a GSP.
No, because...
Do you want to make me look any dumber than I am?
No, there's no street numbers. So we couldn't plug them into the... So we rented a GPS for the car because we didn't know if our phones were going to work, which they didn't work for the first half day. And the GPS needed an address to punch in, and we didn't have an address.
But when I Google things around here, like if I say, okay, I need a gas station, you put a gas station in and, several pop up. So here we said we need to go to... We even put
the hotel
a town.
Name. Yeah.
We put a location. We put a town. We put a village. We put the area of Coronado. There was Tres Rios, Coronado. Nothing was working. We're 45 minutes looking to get to our first destination.
Your accent was really good. I'm so impressed. Did you pick that up on the trip?
It's my French and Spanish. They're very close. They have the same...
Franish. It was Franish.
It was Franish. They have the same root words. Did you know that? They have the same Latin root words as Italian. So I could read and make out, 80% of the language.
You did a great job.
I can read it because it's very close to French.
Yeah.
And even listening, if I could hear slowly the word, it's very similar to some French words.
And your Franish got us through.
My Franish got
very good and got us through.
I wanted to go.
Yes. So we had this GPS. We could not punch it where we wanted to go into it. The Waze was not working. Google Maps wasn't working, and so we spent probably
about 45 minutes in the car
in the parking lot, and then I just said, you know what, it's getting hot in the car. Let's go into the hotel and ask.
We
for
need
help.
to ask how to get.
And so we were able to program at least a church close to where we were going.
A church near one of the villages where we needed to be.
Yeah. But the directions were, go, once you hit this town, you'll pass a bus station, and then look for a sign on the left. And then when you see the sign on the left, drive up the mountain, and when you see a building that's beige turn left.
Yeah.
But we found where we were going. So.
Yes, because it was supposed to be in the village of Tres Rios, and that's somewhere, that church was somewhere around that area, and it brought us to there, which, it's basically following the coastal route down,
Yes.
which was incredibly beautiful. We stopped along
Yeah.
the way. Stunning vistas of ocean and mountains and jungle and birds and macaws, the scarlet macaws, which are very, very specific to the area. Beautiful, beautiful. And it brought us to, we said, well, that looks like a supermarket. And then this tiny little sound that said, Stairway to the Stars.
Yes.
And we're like, okay, I think we're going up.
And you have to pronounce it that way too when you say it.
There's a lot of S's in those words.
When we were driving there, though, we saw macaws flying.
Did I not just say that?
Did you say that? Oh, they were so beautiful and just so
Yes.
many.
Well, we came across that escarpment, and there were cars pulled. Like,
Yes.
not very many places you could pull off because there's cliff and ocean and beaches. So here there was this little escarpment, and we're like, oh, look, let's stop. People are, and that's our first real look at
Yes.
what was to come, more to come.
And we got to the hotel.
And those macaws flew above the very.
They did.
They seem to always be in pairs.
I think
like,
they followed us because we saw
They did follow us.
a pair of them at the hotel, and then we saw a pair of them at the beach.
And then another.
I think
pair.
they were following us.
They did. They
Yeah.
followed us up to coast.
And when in the morning at the hotel, you'd look up and there'd be a toucan in the tree, or there'd be the raccoon with the monkey tail in the tree.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of great things. But
Now, before we get into the history of the Borucans, we should talk about now getting up to that village.
oh my gosh. So you just love the drama. So
Picture it.
So I was communicating with someone in the Borucan village to talk about, here we want to come in and take a class and all that stuff. And so we figured that stuff out. And so they gave us the directions. And it was basically from where we were staying. It was just a couple mountains over. So it wasn't that far.
No, it wasn't that far.
No, but
it's the written directions again. It's yeah. You go ahead.
Okay, so the written directions were basically drive along the highway, pull off the highway as soon as you get to a certain spot, when you see a sign, and then
what else before that?
no, because
To
then
get to the turnoff road.
but the bridges were after. Yeah, so we were on a main highway, then we went off, and then on that road we had to drive and cross 4 bridges. And then after the longest bridge, we're supposed to look up into a tree and look for a satellite. And that's the signal that tells us to turn left.
A colorful painted satellite. But look way up in the trees. You got to look high up. It's up there. Yeah.
While you're driving around a mountain.
And we're driving around the mountains and picture it. It's beautiful. I mean, there's gorges, there's rivers, there are... we thought they were either goats, sheep, or cows way up
they were
on
cows
these ridges.
on a mountain like this.
Yeah, on an angle like this. And we're looking
Could you imagine
and we're like...
legs would be?
And we're crossing tributaries and rivers. We're like, hey, with that bridge, that was number 2 bridge, right? And you're like, no, I think that was 3. I was like, no, I'm pretty sure there was 3. No, it was 2. Okay, let's keep going. Cross another bridge. I'm like, okay, is that bridge number 4? It didn't seem much longer than the other bridge. Was that one longer than the other bridge? Because it seemed about the same. And we carried on.
I think we got to 5 or 6, the 6th bridge, and then we realized to turn around.
And we're like, okay, this is not right. And I did glimpse just prior. I glimpsed a little bit of a dirt road at the corner of my eye. I thought I saw something that looked like a dirt road going up into the trees. I'm like, I'm sure there was a road back there. We turned around. And then we're looking like, oh, how many bridges did we cross now?
And then, so we're looking at the road, we're looking at the scenery, and we're looking up in the trees for the satellite.
And just the road in general, and then we're all lost in our bridge count, so because we crossed back a couple of bridges,
Yeah.
and then we spotted a fella on a motorcycle,
A fella,
an hombre, stopped there, a Tico.
No, a Tico. I think he would define it as. I think he'd be a Tico.
Oh, how do you know he wasn't a Tico?
Because he wasn't side saddle on his motorcycle.
Oh, that was me. Okay, so there he was, and he was letting off a younger fellow, and that person was taking a bus. So there was a road, and then we're pulling up, and he's about to leave on a eye. Whoa, hola, hola.
And then you used your Franish to
I used my Franish to
communicate
say,
with them.
we want to go see the Indigenous Boruca up the mountain, and he was like, yes, this way. So we're like, fantastic. And then I looked up and I'm like, there ain't no painted colored satellite dish up there, but he says
there probably was. So we followed him in the vehicle up the mountain, and Jamie was a little beyond white knuckled, and I actually suggested that he crawl into the back.
I'll put a blindfold on
and close his eyes.
So partway up the mountain, the guy waited for us.
Oh yeah,
there's a fork in the road.
Yeah, so we were probably about 15 minutes up the mountain, and then the motorcycle was long gone. Then we got to a fork in the road, and he had waited for us.
He was sitting there
and told us which direction to go.
And he was like, this way.
And that is just an example of how nice.
So
one of many examples of how nice everyone.
Yeah, it was a good 20.
Yeah.
I felt like it was a long time, and then because we were going quite slow, you couldn't go fast.
No.
Okay, so this mountain,
especially with you in the car.
This mountain is. I'm saying this is not, meant to drive up or on, other than maybe a motorcycle or donkeys or something. This trail, these roads and curves were like this, and then you would turn and go.
But the roads were good though, compared to where we were staying.
Was good. They told us that, good luck on that road because it's probably not very well maintained. But this road was actually better than the mountain road up to where we were staying. This was a better road, but it was terrifying because it was way higher. It kept going for. It did. No.
I don't agree with. I mean, I don't disagree
because I was like.
No, I disagree with the fact that it was terrifying, but it was terrifying. It was thrilling.
I don't like heights, and You're in the driver's side, so he's pictured in the inner lane. This is where there's vegetation here, and I was most often on the edge of the cliff, and it was only wide enough for a car. So the cliffs drop thousands of feet. We're just in the mountain ranges, and it got.
We were on the top of.
It got to the point. Honest to goodness, I thought we were driving into Machu Picchu, which it was exactly like that.
Wrong country.
Because I know it's the wrong country and I know where it is. I was in the mountains and that's what I thought because I was supposed to go to Machu Picchu. And we're literally driving on the crest of the mountain. We're at the top of the mountain. It was just road, cliff, eagles soaring. There were birds lower than us, and there were clouds, and there were.
Yeah, when you're high when the eagles are lower than your car.
And it was when you did glance over, it was these beautiful vistas. But
it was
honest
gorgeous.
To goodness, I'm like,
it was beautiful.
How is this possible? We were driving on the peak. There was nothing else, and for a while till we finally started going a little bit lower again, and then we reached the village. And I had a little bit of unrest unsettling because of my nerves, the winding road and the heights and just the movement of up and down, and oh my gosh, it was it was like being on a roller coaster, but a natural roller coaster in the sky.
And so where did we end up?
A Borucan village.
Yeah.
Tell you a little bit of history of what I know and learned of the Borucans.
And I have my tea.
So,
Taper paper.
as he mentioned, these indigenous peoples, of course, have habitat. They've lived on this land for centuries, thousands of years, going back to the 1500 BC, which is like since 16 as far back as the 16th century BC and prior, and they've lived in these areas for these centuries. And I have to say that the indigenous groups are made up of today of 8 very distinct individual native groups with their differentiated languages and cultures. And the Borucans are known for one thing in particular, and that is their very intricately carved, devilish looking masks. So they ended up where they were in the mountains is because they were able to, when the Spanish Conquistadors arrived in the early 1500s, the very first ones to arrive, they came upon these Borucans, and they were terrified by their masks that they used as in their traditions and religious culture, but they used them to ward off and scare off the Spanish Conquistadors.
But can you imagine they're going through the jungle, and then, well, as you're going through the jungle, you happen upon a scary mask. But there's already terrifying things. There's pythons. There's everything else in the jungle, and then you see this mask popping out at
These
you.
peoples.
Terrified.
So they were terrified, and
Yeah.
it kept them at bay. And these Borucans were able to ward them off and keep their territories, and then they did move way up into the mountains, and
Yes.
into the Talamanca Mountains. Now, the earlier tribes lived in villages, in tribes which were very much based on tribal villages and family kinship and togetherness.
Yeah.
And they soon developed into, they grew in complexities and more organized, and each with their own, eventually their own chiefs and religious leaders and very specific artisans. And within these villages then became a lot of trades, and they were masters of building dugout canoes, and they were masters of the waterways because they used the rivers, the main rivers, and the how do you say that? Tributaries.
Yeah.
To get from one location to the next. And the main river, which is the Grand Taraba River, that makes its way from the interior to the Pacific Ocean. And this is all before the arrival of the Spanish Conquistadors around 1500 and 1506. Now, when they did arrive, they did arrive in around 1506, and again a large group of about 100 men arrived in around 1522 with about 100 men. Now, it wasn't until they were still trying to establish villages here, but some of the other indigenous and natives in the area also scared them off. They burned their crops. They made it very difficult for them
inland
to settle. And these early settlements they failed. Now, by 1561, there was a Juan Vasquez Coronado who established the very first settlement. And how he did that was because he befriended one of the local chiefs. And that chief was able to talk to some of the other chiefs, and they agreed to cooperate with these new arrivals, which they did. Now, but what they didn't know is once they did that, they of course enslaved some of these indigenous peoples to work for them, to work the land, and also they learned about the gold, the textiles, the corn, the beans, anything else they could work and export back to the old world.
Yeah.
So what happened then was a lot of these natives, of course, there was still a lot of strife, a lot of disagreements and rebellions where they would escape. When they had a chance, they escaped and fled to the mountains as well.
Yeah.
They fled to the mountains. This went on and on for some time. Now, fast forward several more years, the son of Coronado, then established this very, very important trade route between Guatemala all the way to the south of Panama. And it was called a mule road. So now they had these indigenous that were working as muleteers, because they were to transport all of the riches and the goods and the beans, the corn, everything, the precious metals, the gold, on this route that took 25 days to get from the center of the Coronado area
Where we were.
to Panama. And this original Coronado established the area, as I mentioned, and he became the first governor, and this became Cartago became the capital, the first capital of Costa Rica. So he's very well known within the history of Costa Rica because of this. And that area, Coronado, is where we stayed.
Yeah.
And this is just all coincidental. When we decided to go there, we knew we were going to be near the Borucans, but I didn't know, and we didn't know the history involved. So, to put it into perspective, this is the south part of Costa Rica. And it's the Decreased Valley, and the Decreased tribes goes back for centuries. The Decreased Valley is the territory involves on one side are the mountains, the Talamanca Mountains. Then there's the Osa Peninsula to the south, the Grand Taraba River that makes its way over to the coast, and the Bay of Coronado, which now is named after Coronado. So from here, we're going to move forward with the Borucas, because the Borucans were the only tribe that were not conquered by the conquistadors. They were able to keep their traditions and their native culture up in those mountains for all of this time during this period. And eventually they did survive, and they were a very proud and independent peoples who were able to keep their culture, their identity, and their thriving culture to this day.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that they say, the reason that they survived is because they were able to maintain their culture. So, and they basically, you can't kill us as long as our culture survives. Exactly. And that's why it's so important. And
there are a lot of parallels, and I'm going to end it with one other thing though. There are a lot of parallels if you think of Canada and the Indigenous. Now, I don't want to go down that road, but it's the same for Australia and anywhere else where there was a native peoples that existed long before any Europeans showed up on the properties. And it's the same thing. Slowly and slowly, the Indigenous peoples of Costa Rica were losing their territories and their lands, and eventually today, now let's bring it back to today, there are over 63,000 indigenous peoples, all divided into these very 8 distinct groups or cultures with their own languages and identities, because even in the day, they did speak different languages, because they inhabit these different areas of Costa Rica today. There are 24 reserves that they have and are on, and they're still, they do still fight with equality or with some prejudice, but 80% of them are artisans. Mm-hmm. And they live independently. They live in tribal villages, as they always have for centuries. They work the land, they work their art forms, and they trade, and they live as they have for thousands of years. And they're proud people, because they were able to survive the tribal conflicts within the communities, because when they expanded and they discovered gold, they were people that then manufactured objects out of stone, there was ceramic, out of bone, and out of gold. As well as today, when you head to these areas, there are these giant stone spheres. Somehow they mastered this intricate carving that to perfection, these spheres that probably weigh several tons each, but they were specifically placed in regions that showed the supremacy and the religion and the political leadership, and it was a symbol of status, where these spheres still sit today at the different locations of the villages throughout the area that you can see to this day. Yep. So proud peoples that survive to this day, and we made our way to one of their villages way high up in this mountain range.
To take a workshop.
Yes.
So the first workshop was with Sergio, and he was an expert mask carver.
And the proof... I'm distracted. There's something fuzzy in my armpit. Okay. Oh my gosh. I'm going to try to ignore this one.
He needs it. He misses you.
Love. No, now you know time for love. I'm trying to think. Okay. So... I had to ask him, and again, this is where he said they didn't speak a word of English, and so I said to him, because he makes the tools for carving. Number one, he made the tools, and that's sharp, because when he was just going, it was like butter through this wood, and I'm thinking, so I said to him, I was like looking, I was going like this and going like this and pointing at the tool and going, slice, 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 right?
Yeah. And his hands look like... Well, there's a famous photo of Pelé that Annie Leibovitz took.
Because he used to carve masks.
And no, but and his feet, you knew who it was, and just by looking at his feet, they were worn and been through many wars and all that stuff.
And who's Pele?
He's a soccer player.
Do our knitter folk know that?
Sorry. He's one of the world's most famous soccer players of all
Yes,
time.
and he passed away not that long ago.
Yes, he passed away a couple weeks ago. But it reminded me of that because when you look at his hands, you can see this is somebody who's done a lot of masks, and he has the war wounds to show it.
Okay,
so what about his hands?
So Pele's hands, sounds like his hands and feet were scarred. Well, talk about scarring. He showed us there are numerous cuts in his hands and even in his thighs, and he mentioned his thighs and where he's had to, because he's holding the mask. Well, that was one of the things. He's holding the mask between his legs. And I'm like, don't want to slip up there. But he did have some injuries on his legs and all over his hands.
Yeah.
This guy carves, and you're going to get cut. But he's a master carver, and he worked his magic in front of us.
And can we talk about why they have masks?
Yeah, I mentioned it.
No, but you didn't talk about the festival from the end of December to early January.
The Festival of the Devils.
Yes, and let's talk a little bit about that.
We'll go right ahead.
I was using the royal Lets. So at the end of December, early January, they have a festival, and it's really to recreate or reenact the when the conquistadors came and were trying to get them, basically. And so they put on their masks, and then they dress somebody up as a bull, basically, which represents the conquistadors, and they basically demonstrate or show that they're not going to be conquered.
Because, as I mentioned, think about this. They were the only tribe that kept their territories and land. They consider themselves not conquered by the Spaniards, and so they're very proud of this. So they celebrate that time in history.
Yeah,
and we had just missed it, but it was interesting too because with my Franish. They mentioned the mask, and you can see that there was a little mask in it. And I said to him, I pointed at the masks, and sure enough, he understood what I said because I mentioned that mask and the little child's mask, which I said, well, that's for a young one. So sure enough, he showed us the photos. He wore the one adult mask, and his little boy, wore the little boy mask, and he showed us photos of the festival. It was incredible, and it was just like, had we been there for that, would have been exceptional. But we got to see the photos, so it was wonderful, and the masks were there that they wear.
Do we have any masks? That's one of the masks, and it is so light. It's very light.
Yeah, this is incredible because. Do you remember what kind of wood it was? It was a type of cedar, wasn't it?
I think so. Yeah, they used two different types of wood.
Yeah, and some of this they use. They try to use some of the natural color, which they could, but today they do get other colors, synthetic colors, but they can and do sometimes use some of the natural colors or pigmentation to stain and do the masks. Some of them are very simple, some of them are unpainted, but this is one of the very traditional
it's
masks.
Beautiful. Yeah. And they sell them all over the country.
Well, in some stores, very select few stores,
and the airport.
Yes.
So that was great. It was so interesting.
Yeah, it was fascinating.
And Sergio was amazing.
He made it seem so simple. He was just going away and carved and show us some of the carving, and then he just started doing some of the painting to give us an idea. He started some of the strokes, and just to give us an idea how the process of layering and the intricacies of the painting and the whole process, which was absolutely fantastic. So he would have himself made this mask himself.
And he also communicated to us through translation on his phone.
This is true,
which was fantastic. So he would explain what he was doing into the phone and then hold it up to us, and we would listen to it. It was great.
Yeah, they do have technology as well. Yes, he had his phone, which he then pressed the button, and the translation explained how and what he was doing and why, and some of the traditions and some of what the images they use on there.
Yeah, excellent. excellent. And then we had lunch
We
before
did.
the next thing. So
Lunch
they made
was
lunch.
included.
It was incredible. Lunch was fantastic. We sat down in the house and it was delicious. It was
We were
so
on the
good.
patio, on the front,
Yeah.
on the front patio of the house where we had the class, and they brought out this traditional meal. And what's so great about it is just this home cooked meal that they would have. That made it extra special.
And what was it?
It was a meat, which I'm thinking
It was
was
pork. Yeah.
And they had the traditional rice and the traditional beans.
Yeah.
And
Fresh fruit.
And fresh fruit. And did they have
Plantain.
a bit of a
I
salad
think it was
and plantain?
Yeah. It was delicious.
It was absolutely delicious. Yes. And we were very grateful, and we told them how it was very good, and it's just what we needed.
So the next workshop we did was natural dyeing, but it wasn't just natural dyeing, it was the whole process. And when I talk about the whole process, we talk about a sustainable process or closing the loop on this. When we think about fiber sheds, specifically the one in California or the one in Canada, we try to source our fiber, but then we process the fiber, we try to dye it and send it to a mill, all within one designated area. Well, they do all of that on the reserve.
Yeah.
And that's why we have the cotton here as our flower today. They grow cotton on the property. They pick the cotton, they spin the cotton, and then they dye the cotton, and then they weave the cotton. So
They do everything.
They do everything, and they did all of it they didn't do all of it for us, but what they did do was spinning. I loved watching the spinning with a drop spindle. That was great.
Yes, because I had never seen. I mean, we've been to festivals, and I didn't. You did take a little spin class with that one little thingy,
The drop spindle.
which just looks like
Which we have a couple
Which
of
just
them
looks like a top. You just give it
Yes.
a spin.
Yeah.
And she had this long one which she just spun, and it's like she made it seem so simple. Just going, give it a spin. There it was, magic, and there it was, yarn spun.
And
Not yarn, the cotton. But
Yeah, the cotton was spun into
it's
yarn.
Same way.
Yes.
Same way with yarn.
Yeah. So then once they had that, we were there to see the natural dyeing, and
Yes.
it was great. And so I'm going to put my glasses on so I can read some of these things. But why don't you hold up? We actually did a couple of purchases.
We did.
And so we've got the runner right here, but we have matching placemats with it.
Yes.
And so I wanted to buy the placemat because they used so many different colors. It's got so many different colors in it. And so we were watching the workshop, and they were doing a number of dyes, creating a number of dye baths. But the dye baths that they have are different than the dye baths that we use here. Because we're
Yes.
not talking about, there's a multi-step process, and what we saw them doing was actually taking leaves and rubbing the leaves against the fiber to create the color. And then what I found really interesting was adding the citric acid or the lime. And the limes there are so juicy. Like they've
Yes.
got way more juice in it than they do here. And so it was fascinating just to see them get their hands in and work on some of the colors.
Yeah, it's a different kind of lime. They even mentioned that because everybody knows the way they work. It looks like a lime on the outside. It's a lime color green, but the inside is orange. And so it's a lot juicier, they mentioned, and a lot more just strong and potent, let's say. It's just got that real, taste when you use it in a drink. It's just like, you pucker.
Yeah.
So it's a very specific kind of lime, which they call lemon, but it's lemon, lime.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you can see in some of these we have multiple blues. We've got different
Yes.
blues, and some of them look indigo blue. And so one of the leaves that they use is from the sacatinta plant. And so what they do is they boil that for several days, and then they'll use the leaves and rub them against the cotton to get the color. And then for the blue, they also will use azul de mata, which the families of the indigo. So it's very similar to the indigo that we use.
Were all the plants like similar to an indigo then? The leaves? Or was
No.
there anything different?
Just the ones that came out blue. And what was interesting is we were sitting there talking to her as she'd finished dyeing it, and it was oxidizing in front of us.
Yeah,
so
that's
it came
right.
out green, and then we'd get this beautiful. By the time we finished, or she finished the demonstration, it was a beautiful blue color.
Yeah. And it's very similar to the way we do the indigo dye, and when you pull it out, it oxidizes and goes from green to blue. But it did that the way she just rubbed it this way, used the citric, and there sat and plopped it down, and I'm thinking, well, that's not blue. It turned blue.
And when you think about the magic of indigo, and when during the oxidization process, when it goes from green to blue, we always think that's magic. But what is even equally as magical is we look at the Sacatinta plant that she was rubbing.
Yes.
But they take that also, and we were talking about how the blue that comes out of it, they can also get a green. And the green, they take the leaves, they burn them, and then they take those leaves and they pour cold water on them, and then they rub
From the
them.
ashes, you mean, or the burnt?
The burnt leaves.
Okay.
And then they use that, and they get a green out of it, and from the same plant. So you're getting a fantastic blue, and you're getting a fantastic green. But what I love about that is, you think about, how did you figure that out?
Yeah.
And
how did you know that you could burn them?
Yeah.
Set them on fire, however they do it, and then it will turn into this other color. But that's the magic of natural dyeing.
It is.
There's so many different ways and steps and sequences and processes, and add this and that into it to create color. So they've mastered these over hundreds of years.
And then red, they use teak, and they use the wet leaves and rub the teak together as well. One of the things I found interesting was mordant is such an important factor when you're dyeing yarn, and so I kept thinking about what do you use with mordant? But what they use is they'll use limes for the citric acid, but they'll also use salt, and they will use vinegar. Yes. And the salt for me when I'm dyeing is to really help the color be equal within the dye pot. So yes. We didn't get into the use of salt, but I would have liked to.
But they did specifically, because again they couldn't speak English, but she was translating. Some of it translated, but she mentioned in her own language, and we understood how she said this won't fade. This we do this these colors she did right before our very eyes, and the way she did it just there, and it seemed so simple. Yeah, she said they won't fade. These are permanent colors.
And then turmeric. Remember turmeric? They're smashing
Was it turmeric? Was it turmeric? I thought it was a different plant.
No, smashing the turmeric and rubbing it, and they added lime juice to the turmeric. Yes. When they were rubbing it. But you take the yarn.
Is that when she crushed with the rock?
Yes. Yep. And so that was really cool. And then for orange, it was the achito bush, which is it's also called the lipstick bush.
Is it?
Because of the color that you can get from this plant.
We need to plant that.
I know.
The lipstick bush.
And I don't think our brothers, it can't go below freezing. But anyway, and this is used, the color is used in a lot of food products. It's used in lipstick, and that's how it got its name.
They still use it today.
They still use it today. Yeah, I mean, synthetic dyes have pushed a lot of it out, but it's still being used. And then there was another one.
Yes.
I've got a couple more colors. Just bear this
and I want to point out too. That when we were having lunch just here on the patio, she just went right there in her garden, literally 5 feet away, and we don't know what she was doing. But she just went over there. She went boom. She plucked this. She plucked that, and she plucked that, and she went to the table behind. So she actually got the turmeric and one or two of those leafy plants right there.
Yeah. For black, they use charcoal and mud, which is very interesting. That people have been using charcoal and mud to get black for forever, and you can't just use any
thousands of years.
You have to use a certain mud. I think we have found mud on this property that I can use to dye yarn, and it's thanks to Zan who found it, because he will run over and start eating it and he only goes to this one spot. So out of
along the stream back there,
all the acreage around here, he goes to one spot
in the stream that runs through the woods.
Yeah,
and it is black. The dirt, that mud earth is black. So I wonder if that's something we could get something out of it. And
you know how the pigs snuff out the truffles?
Huh?
So I think we've got a dog that can hopefully sniff out the mud that gives us the color black.
Well, that's what he's been trained for. It's like, Zan, get us some dye stuff. Go forage, please. And then he just goes out there. That's what he's been trained to do.
And so green, let's go to Monja green. So for green, it's the same thing. So with the Gavilana plant, they take the leaves and they boil that for several days, and then they're able to get green. The mango is interesting.
So remember mango.
Yeah, so they took the pulp from the mango, and they were using basically mixing the yarn with the mango pulp to get a yellow-orange color.
Oh, was that the bright?
Yes. Yeah.
Yellow?
Yeah. And then the gray-brown was the
videotaping.
The gray-brown was the calabaza, which they also do smash it into a pulp. And then boil it, and then you can get a gray-brown. And then the last one is brown, Amaryllian plant, and they take the leaves, or they take the bark from this and they soak it.
Oh, yes.
And then they boil it. And so what I found fascinating with this is there's so many similarities between what they are doing and what we are doing.
Absolutely.
Especially the use of bark and the use of boiling certain things.
Yes.
Some things you can boil, others you can't. Like flowers, they would never boil. But there was a lot of similarities around it. And I just love the way that they got their hands into these things. One thing we've never used before is pulp. And so that's something I want to explore as well. It seems really interesting, and it was absolutely fascinating.
Well, there are different ways of. There's so many different ways of doing these things, and we've relied on a lot of old recipes, a lot of history, a lot of history books, historical recipes that go way back. Which some of them we still haven't tried. Which we want to definitely try a black recipe that goes back, to the Middle Ages. But we've most of them is from books or reading. But here we are sitting with these indigenous peoples that have been doing this hands-on for centuries, and we're sitting there with them, and they make it seem so simple, but it's so relatable, because here I just feel like, our country is only a few hundred years old, Canada, and the indigenous peoples have been doing this as well. They've been dyeing stuffs, natives, all across North America, but this seems even more ancient. You've got to remember that these peoples are descendants of the original Mayans and some of the Amazon natives from these areas. They're descendants from, so this goes back. And here they are doing it as they did then, right before us. And there the magic was doing within minutes. There it was.
And one thing we didn't talk about was who's doing it. So we only talked about a piece of this right now. We talked about the gathering, the spinning, the dyeing, and then they take this and they do the back weaving. So they have a backstrap weave, and so they tie it to a tree, and then we'll strap it to their back, and they'll weave. And the size of it, they can only get basically a runner size out of it. And so
this width, if you imagine this around your waist, and it's so incredible the way they do it, and that's the width you get.
Yeah, and so some of the women then in the within the group will sew them together, and they can make bedspreads or other things.
They'll sew these runners together to make a larger cloth.
But the important point that I wanted to make was that a lot of these are done by women, and so women would traditionally be doing chores, and then in between the chores they would be doing this. But now that the art has taken off, and as you mentioned, 80% of the individuals are now working as artisans. There's more people now. There's more men that are starting to do this as well, if they're not mask carving. So I found it fascinating. I found the whole thing fascinating.
Yeah.
One thing. One of the colors I didn't talk about was the Tyrion purple, which I want to hand over to you.
I know a little bit about this most magnificent color, and it's fascinating. I love reading about history and the history of color. Now, this particular color is fascinating because it goes back thousands of years. It dates back to around the 14th century BCE, and it was discovered by the Phoenicians. Now, they discovered how to extract a purple from a shellfish, and it's particularly the Murex shellfish.
Yeah.
There are 2-3 in the same family that you could extract the purple, but I guess the most dynamic and the most, purplish came from this one specific shellfish. And once they discovered this dye, it was one of the most expensive dyes in its day. And it was so expensive that it would take up to 10,000 shellfish to produce 1 gram of this Tyrion purple. So, 10,000 for 1 gram. 1 gram, to put it into perspective, you could dye the hem of a garment. And so you could imagine how much it would take to dye an entire garment. But they didn't dye the garment, they actually dyed the fiber prior to weaving. And if you think about it, 1 pound of this Tyrion purple cost about 3 pounds of gold.
Wow.
1 pound of dyed wool was again about worth 1 pound of gold. So now how they did this was they would just collect these shellfish and they would just crush them and leave them rot openly in the sun, and they would bleed this secretion from the glands. It bleeds this liquid that then turns into this purple. Now, in Phoenician mythology, you had the mistress Tyros, who was the mistress of their patron god. Now, it's said that the couple they were walking along the beach with their dog. A shellfish washed up on shore and the dog bit into it, and its mouth foamed and turned purple, this bright, deep, rich purple color. And Tyros was like, oh my God, I need a new dress, and I want it in that color.
And Tyrion a male or female?
She is the mistress. She wanted a new garment. She thought, oh
Just
my
checking.
God. So, yeah, she's like, and this began this incredible industry. Now, again, they were the masters of this color, and there were sequences and steps that they would take to create this most wonderful purple color by adding, by boiling, by one of the processes would take 3 days, where they would add salt. And you have to remember as well is you can create different, just like we do, you can get different various shades, but ultimately it's the purple. And so you get this from a pink to reds to these deep rich violets to the deep rich purple that was sought after. And one of the recipes is you would add salt, you would boil it for days, and then you would boil it in tin. And it was in these tin vessels,
oh, wow.
which we know today, and over the centuries, tin and chrome and all of these other things that you can still add to today to manipulate the color. So these were the secrets and some of the secret ingredients to get to this purple color. And it was adopted by the Romans because of a symbol of status. And it was their imperial color and a symbol of high status like anything else.
Sure.
So this was a very prized and sought after purple that was an entire economy into itself. And they would do it on the outskirts of the village because you could imagine it comes from the Isle of Tyre, Tyre. And this was in the coast of the Mediterranean. So the Phoenicians were all along between Syria, Lebanon, and Israel. But particularly the Isle of Tyre is today in Lebanon. And so on the outskirts, they would have these mounds and mounds up to 130 feet high of discarded shellfish. So you can imagine the putridness of this rotting shellfish on the outskirts of the village. And when they excavate that to this day, they can still find these mounds of shellfish. And I want to also mention that the purple became the sought after color, like I mentioned, but they continued to do this for many, many, many years, almost to extinction of these shellfish. So one more thing I want to mention is that this island of Tyre was one of the most important ports in the ancient world for this purple dye alone. It's known as the royal purple or imperial purple. So one of the most important ports in the ancient world, and the economy based on this color alone. And I also want to mention that the way they extracted it, as I mentioned, it comes from this liquid in the gland, and they were able to extract it, but it was very, very, very expensive. So just like any other expensive product, there were some of these other cities or people who were looking to copy it, because as even today, anything you want to find a cheaper version of it. So of course they used, as we know, they tried to use madder root and woad, madder root being the red, and of course then add the blue. Well, we all know blue and red make purple. So they tried to do this with woad, but of course you can't get the blue that you get
purple,
to get that deep rich purple. So it was just a cheaper way of trying to do it. And basically you can never reproduce this magnificent purple. But so very expensive to do, which brings us to.
Can I just say those are very expensive? You said that it was worth 3 pounds of gold. And, and so with the introduction of synthetic dyes now, do you know how much it would cost to produce synthetically? $4.
There you go. And I also want to mention, not only, so they dyed the fiber is what they did. They dyed the fiber prior to weaving. But ultimately, which is very rare, and in history, that you can get a very special garment, because remember I said a gram, you could maybe color the hem. But the super rich and the super nobility and, the Roman emperors, you could have the garment completely dyed. So a second dyeing of the garment to get an even deeper, richer purple on top of the rich purple. It's very rare, but it was also done. So you can imagine the cost and who was having their garment dyed a second time completely with this purple. So 10,000 shellfish to make 1 gram, you can only imagine. Very, very, and how I mentioned, this was not environmentally, you can't continue the production because you can only have so many shellfish. And also they're very far off the coast in deep waters where you have to go and dive for these particular shellfish. So that's another reason why it's so expensive. But there's another twist to the story, because we know twists. The twist in the story is that this Tyrion purple, over the centuries, you can imagine, word eventually got out there that there were these shellfish, that you can get this purple from these shellfish. So they weren't the only place in the world. Remember we mentioned how the Borucans had mastered the waterways, and they were able to go up the Grand Caraba River up to the Pacific, down into the Pacific, into the Bay of Coronado. Well, there they discovered these shellfish. They're shellfish, and we'll show a photo of them because we've all seen that shape of seashell, and we'll show that. So they just call them, sea snails. They're like a snail, but they're the shellfish. But they are the only people in the world, and to this day, who were able to extract the dye from them without killing the mollusk.
Yeah.
And how they did that is they were able to, they blow into these shellfish, and they're also able to coax them and milk them, the gland. And they said it didn't take much for the secretion to just come out. And so you could just secrete, the secretion comes out, and it's a whitish liquid. And also, just like indigo and these other blues, it's kind of interesting and fascinating because the liquid goes from a milky white, and then when it hits the air and the oxidization, it turns into a yellow, and then to a greenish blue, to then the deep, dark, rich purple.
Wow.
So they learned this tradition, and as I was going to say, word was out, and they discovered it, and they were able to do it a different way, which is very environmentally friendly. And to this day, they can still do this. But as you could say, the shellfish are very, they're not in masses. So to collect them and extract these minimal amounts of dye, they're still able to dye some of their yarn with this Tyrion purple by coaxing the liquids out of these and they could revive them and they put them back into nature, back into the water.
That's incredible.
Where they could use them again and again. And they've been doing this for over 500 years. They've been doing this process when it was discovered that they had some of these shellfish just off the coast.
And they're the only people in the world doing this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's incredible. I loved it. This was definitely the highlight of our trip. It was
absolutely
amazing.
The highlight of our trip.
It was phenomenal.
I mean, to connect with people who've been doing this, their livelihood, it's their livelihood today. It's recipes and traditions that are thousands of year old, some of them, this one over 500 years old with the shellfish in particular, but these other natural dyes go way back to when they conquered. We could say that they conquered the Spanish because they kept their identity, their tribe, their culture. They are living up in the mountains, and they scared them off, and they're a successful, thriving peoples today.
Yeah, I would say also, just summing it up, that the trip that we had could be classified as ethno-tourism.
Yes.
And experiential tourism.
Experiential tourism. And could I just want to mention one more thing about
sure.
our family?
Yeah.
Only because this family, I then, with my, what was the language I spoke? My French. With my French,
Spanish.
I was trying to figure out, because there were a lot of different people there.
Yes.
There was the one that they mentioned that she was going to cook the meal, which she did, and then there was Marina, and there was Sergio who cut the mask, and then there was another younger woman, and another one with a baby, and another gentleman with a baby, and I was like, how? So it turned out that Marina they were like, the mother,
related.
The younger lady who served us and sold us and showed us the products. So it was like she was the sister. The other one was the cousin. That was her aunt, and they were all working together. As I mentioned, the earlier tribes were all. It was all family and kinship, and that's how they lived and survived. And it's heartwarming to see them doing exactly what they're doing and love to do. And we had some laughs. We had them laughing. We were talking about the food, and we were giggling, and also, to make them understand, and we did translate, but we didn't need to. You brought out your dyed wool because he had his knitting with him.
Yes.
So he brought
surprise.
Yes. So he had his dyed red, and they were fascinating because we were trying to explain that we do natural dyeing back home in Canada, but with len, and we're saying len, as I mentioned. Len in French was like lano. It was like they understood that it was wool, and they could feel it. We showed them, and Marina and even the one who carved the mask, they were fascinated. They all wanted to touch it, and they were looking at the red, and we were explaining how this is what we do back home, and that's what brought us here. They understood it, and so there was this kinship between us and this connection, and I just wanted to hug them all because they were wonderful, happy people.
But you could feel the love, and the other thing that you could feel was just bringing our craft, watching their craft, and then showing ours, and we're all tactile people, and touching the wool, touching the cotton, and just the appreciation that everybody had for each other.
Because they knew the connection. Oh my gosh, the connection was there because they knew that we understood what they're doing and what we do and what it takes, and appreciate it, and how much we appreciated what they do.
Yeah.
And we get to come home with these handcrafted, beautiful treasures.
Yeah, fantastic. But it was phenomenal. I highly recommend it. I highly recommend Costa Rica. It is absolutely beautiful. Beach is phenomenal. And the jungle and just everybody was just so nice. So the big news. The big news, before we get into the big news, just a little segue into that is that we mentioned that 2022 was very busy for us.
It was busy.
And I was missing something in our whole crafting world. Like I was missing. The thing I was missing was playtime. I like to call it playtime. But being out in the workshop and experimenting with more botanicals, and coming out with more different colors, different ways of chasing colors. Yes. And I really missed that. And so I said to Jamie, we need to rethink our business model, and I really want to step back a little bit and focus on creating more colors. And
part of this is part of the trip, because this even opened our eyes the way they did things.
Absolutely.
They did things right before our eyes, so fast, made it seem so simple in these traditions that go way back. And there's so many other recipes and different ways of doing things that we haven't tried. There's some products that we can, like natural. What am I trying to say? Like minerals and liquids and things that we haven't used that could easily manipulate and change colors. And
Yeah.
this just reinvigorated our desire to be more creative and experiment and do and try different blended sequences to come up with beautiful colors.
Yeah.
And it also opened our eyes on our tour into the jungles, because we were able, with the tour guide, which was partly experiential as well, because it was hands-on, him describing and showing us, we opened our eyes to things we would never have seen walking through this jungle by ourselves. We would not have spotted the dozens of things that we've shown you without
Yeah.
this person walking through. And because he was learned and he had studied and knew, he was able to just go, there, come here, I want to show you something, and here and there. It opened our eyes to what we could look for when we're just
Yes.
foraging and walking through our own backwoods.
Yeah, definitely opened our eyes
So
to
this
that.
brings us to where we are.
It does. And
Today.
so when I say, stepping away and wanting to rethink what we're doing, it really is just turning down the number of festivals that we're going to attend this year, and really focusing more on the workshop. But one of the passions I have, and I think we have, is teaching. We love teaching. And so I said to Jamie, let's rethink our business model and try to figure out what we want to do for 2023. And then we received basically
Out of the blue.
an email from someone saying to us, I think you should apply for this government grant. And so we had, I think it was a week to apply for the government grant, and we got it. So we were one of 5 companies that have been awarded this grant. And so what it is really it's connected to tourism. And they were looking for companies that can demonstrate or have or embrace experiential tourism. And so we have just built the workshop. We plan to have a number of classes in our workshop.
We had already been thinking about doing
We'd already
some
been thinking about
workshops
it.
and classes and how we're going to do this.
Yeah, we had a pilot project with the university last year.
The Trent University
Yeah.
an indigenous group through your daughter's connections.
Yes.
At the university.
So what will happen is the area that we live in is Quinte, and so the tourism group will help us promote it. They'll talk about our business plan, and it's going to be amazing. It's going to be I'm so excited.
They
about
have
it.
all of these experts, these people who have worked in tourism and, as we mentioned, experiential tourism, which is specifically, they want people to have an experience. It's not just showing up, having a look, and walking away. It's integrating yourself and hands-on, getting your hands in there, and doing something and making something. It could be as simple as, and then taking away something with you from the
Yes.
day.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be an entire feeling and experience and a mutual sort of sharing of knowledge and history and all of what we do.
Yeah.
Because as we know, I like myself a little history. And so they will learn about the college, they will learn the history of what
Yes.
we're doing. And we want to bring in the Indigenous component with my
Absolutely.
Métis background, which, here in Canada as well, in North America, they've been doing this for centuries. So we want to streamline our chats, our
Yep.
workshops, our colorways, and come up with some different workshops that we can then invite
Right.
all of you, anyone who wants to make their way, and come up with some workshops that they're going to help us put everything in place and in order and help us
Yeah. And then we're still going to be
sort it all out.
We're still going to be dyeing yarn, and we're still
Oh,
going to
yeah.
be producing yarn. We're still going to be attending one festival this year.
Well,
it
one
will still
so
be
far.
it will still be available on our website, but we have a different an additional focus, which is complementary, and we've been focusing a lot on protein fibers, and we're going to also look at cellulose fibers as well.
Yes.
And get into the cotton and flax.
Yeah, and that would be just part of the workshops.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because
that's
what we
I mean.
still love to do, and
Yeah.
we've become very knowledgeable in how to dye yarn and wool in particular. And so this is going to be a lot of it. You can dye cotton the same way. And so we're going to look at different fibers, and so that deciding on how we're going to do this and what is it that people are going to be able to dye and take home with them.
Yes. So we'll have a series of workshops, and I think our first workshop's probably going to kick off in June. That's, I think, our target date. And then we'll have a number of workshops throughout the year. And so we're really looking forward to it.
And we're so excited.
Yes.
This just sort of fell in our laps. And it's just that we're at this crossroads about how we want to, and this has been on our mind to do anyway. And so we're very, very grateful to the Quinte Arts Council, who
And Quinte Tourism.
And they reached out to us, and they're
Yes.
going to be working with these people that this is what they do, and they're going to be able to really kind of guide us through where we
Yes.
need to be to get to where we want to be.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, last year we're just about producing and pumping out the yarn, and we're working and from one festival to the next, driving halfway across the country and back, here, there, and everywhere. It was really a little bit much, but it was also wonderful.
Yes, it was absolutely
So
wonderful.
this year we'll take that step back.
Yeah.
We still want to be out there because we need to see people
I think there's
live
no
in
question
person.
that you're out there.
So, absolutely excited as to what's to come.
Yeah, and if you have any suggestions on the types of classes that you'd like to see,
Yeah.
we would love to hear from you. I've got some percolating in the back of my head, but I'd love to hear from you as well. If you've got any ideas of classes that we can teach.
So thank you so much for hanging in there and watching this. There was a
Yes.
lot of history, a lot of chat, but I hope you appreciate what we've seen and experienced and saw here today as much as we appreciated being there hands-on. It's beyond words, beyond heartfelt. It's mind-boggling, beautiful scenery, beautiful people, and an absolutely one of the most wonderful getaways that I think you said as well.
Absolutely.
One of our
Yep.
very, very best getaways of
So thank you so much for watching, and thank you. We didn't at the beginning talk about the new viewers as well. Thank you, new viewers, if you've made it this long. We really appreciate you watching. And also,
Absolutely.
we've got some clips from our trip where we walk through the jungle and do other things. So if you want to stick around for that,
and
that's
the photos,
great.
and the photos that you see, they're just taken with their cell phones. Some of the videos,
Everything was from
our
phone,
phone or
yeah.
cell phones. There was some incredible scenery, some incredible wildlife to look at as well.
So thank you so much for watching. Take care and have a fantastic week.